Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring tithing. Through the lens of Elder Neil L. Anderson's recent General Conference talk, Tithing, Opening the Windows of Heaven.
Hmm.
And for those maybe who aren't familiar with General Conference, it's a biannual event for members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints,
Right.
where church leaders share messages about faith and living gospel principles. And we'll be unpacking some of the experiences that Elder Andersen shared, some of the theological arguments that he made, and, see if we can uncover any surprising historical or cultural connections. What do you think?
Yeah. I think it's a fascinating topic because it really does delve into both the spiritual and practical aspects of faith.
Absolutely. And he goes right into a really powerful story to illustrate his points.
Okay.
He talks about a brother, Roger Pera from Venezuela,
Mhm.
and he kind of sets the stage. He's like, picture this. It's 2019. A nationwide blackout plunges the country into chaos, and people are looting out of desperation.
Yeah, a pretty intense setting for a story about faith.
You're telling me. Amidst all this turmoil, Brother Pera's bakery remains completely untouched.
Wow. Talk about a contrast.
I know.
It really emphasizes the miraculous aspect of the story.
Right. And get this. Brother Pera's 12-year-old son, Rogelio, makes this observation. He says, Papa, I know why our store was protected. You and Mama always pay your tithes.
Hmm.
And it's just this simple statement from a child, and it really kind of sets the stage for Elder Anderson's message about tithing. Like, this is an act of faith, offering 10% of your increase to God, which can lead to blessings, even protection, during really challenging times.
It's interesting, though, because I feel like the talk doesn't frame tithing as like a transactional exchange.
Exactly. It's not about striking a deal. It's about something much deeper.
Yeah.
He's saying it's about putting God first in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where that theological aspect comes into play. He references Malachi 3.11, a passage I think many listeners might recognize,
Right.
which talks about opening the windows of heaven.
Yeah, that imagery is so central to understanding how he presents tithing. It's not just about like material blessings raining down, but about aligning yourself with divine principles and trusting in a higher power.
Right, recognizing that those blessings might come in forms we might not expect,
Yeah.
not just material.
Totally.
And, I think it's important to acknowledge that some people, both within and outside of the faith, might see tithing purely through a financial lens.
Right. It's true. And he even addresses that head on.
Okay.
He's like, look, I know that while tithing involves finances, it's ultimately a demonstration of faith.
And a way of prioritizing your beliefs over material possessions, like really shifting your mindset from what's in it for me to how can I live in alignment with my faith?
Yeah. It's about recognizing that true abundance encompasses more than just material wealth.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly compelling story about Brother Pera, a scriptural foundation with Malachi 3.111, and a clear emphasis on faith over a purely financial transaction. Where does he take us next?
Well, he kind of expands the conversation by pointing out that this concept of giving a portion of one's income to a higher purpose, this isn't unique to Mormonism.
Okay.
Like we see this practice throughout history in ancient civilizations, different faiths.
So it's not about inventing a new system, but rather tapping into something ancient.
Totally. Something that resonates across cultures and time periods.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of raises the question, like, why has this practice endured for so long?
Right.
What does it suggest about human nature?
That's such a great point. Like, what is it about this that we see over and over? It makes you wonder if there's something deeper at play here.
And this historical context is really interesting because it adds another layer to our understanding of tithing. Like, it invites us to consider its broader implications and how it might relate to our own lives.
I'm completely with you. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle here, trying to understand the significance of this practice. But let's bring it back to the here and now. He goes on to explain how tithing functions within the church today, right?
Right, and he's very clear that tithing funds are considered sacred,
Okay.
that they belong to the Lord, not to any individual or even the institution of the church itself.
So how does that work in practice? What does it mean for these funds to be considered sacred?
Well, he really emphasizes that church leaders are stewards of these funds. They are accountable for their responsible and ethical use. He even shares a story about a young Gordon B. Hinckley asking his father about this very thing.
Yeah.
Like, remember that story? It's so good.
I do.
Such a telling anecdote.
Yeah.
Young Gordon, always curious. He wants to know how the church uses tithing funds. And his father's response is so simple, but so powerful. What the authorities of the church do with it need not concern you, Gordon. They are answerable to the Lord, who will require an accounting at their hands.
Wow. It really highlights the gravity of that responsibility.
Right, like this is not something to be taken lightly. And so to illustrate how these sacred funds are used, he provides some examples of where they go.
He lists things like missionary work, temple building, supporting local congregations, and educational initiatives.
Right. All vital aspects of building this global faith community.
Mm-hmm.
And you kind of see the connection back to that historical context we were talking about. Like this idea of tithing, supporting a community of faith,
Right.
is a recurring theme.
And to bring it even closer to home, like remember Charlotte's story?
Yes.
Wanting for nothing? This is where it all comes full circle. Those funds directly support missionary work, like the kind that may have touched Charlotte's family building temples, sustaining congregations. Like it creates this beautiful cycle
Yeah, it does.
of giving and support.
And then to further emphasize this idea of tithing's impact, he shares another really powerful story. This one really resonated with me. It's about a woman named Martha Williams, who happened to be Elder Andersen's mother-in-law.
Oh, I remember the story. It's
Yeah.
incredibly moving.
Right. Even in her final days battling cancer, she was determined to pay her tithing. She told her daughter, "I want to be right before the Lord."
Mm-hmm. That phrase, like, I want to be right before the Lord.
Yes.
It's incredibly powerful. It wasn't about outward appearances or impressing anyone. It was about something deeper, like a quiet commitment that transcended her circumstances.
Yeah, it's a beautiful illustration of how tithing, at its core, is about aligning oneself with divine principles, regardless of any, like, external validation or visible rewards.
It's interesting because listening to this talk got me thinking about that whole concept of giving until it feels good. You hear a lot about that in, like, personal finance and self-help circles.
Totally. The abundance mentality.
Yeah.
Like where generosity becomes a catalyst for attracting more into your life. It's so fascinating to see these parallels, even if they're not explicitly stated.
Right. And I'm not saying he's advocating for a prosperity gospel or anything.
Right.
But there is that shared thread about the potential power of giving and aligning your actions with a higher purpose.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the universality of certain principles and how they might manifest in different ways across various aspects of life.
Right.
Like we see it in these ancient traditions, we see it in modern religious practices,
Mm-hmm.
we even see it in like secular self-improvement philosophies.
Yeah.
It kind of suggests that there might be something inherently powerful about the act of giving, regardless of the specific context.
It's like we're uncovering a hidden code here or something.
Exactly.
Like a fundamental truth
Yes.
that resonates across cultures and time periods. It's a lot to consider.
It is.
So we've covered the personal stories, the theological underpinnings, the historical context, and even touched on some really interesting parallels with secular ideas. Where does he leave us at the end of his talk? Like, what message does he want listeners to take away from this deep dive into tithing?
I think he leaves us with a really powerful image and a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
He kind of reminds us that the church is out of obscurity.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's growing, it's expanding its reach.
Right.
And he acknowledges that while this growth might be met with both support and opposition,
Right.
that it's a testament to the power of faith and the commitment of its members.
That's a really interesting point. It speaks to the idea that tithing isn't just about personal blessings, but about contributing to something larger than yourself.
100%.
Yeah.
And to kind of drive that point home, he quotes Gamaliel,
Okay.
a figure from the New Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And when faced with the growing influence of early Christians, Gamaliel famously said, "If this work be of men, it will come to naught. But if it be of God, ye cannot overthrow it."
Wow. That's a bold statement.
Right.
And like
Yeah.
placing that in the context of a talk about tithing, it suggests that this practice, this act of faith and commitment is part of something much larger, something divinely ordained.
It's about trusting in a plan that extends beyond our immediate understanding
Right.
and recognizing that the impact of our actions, particularly those rooted in faith, can have far-reaching consequences.
It's a pretty awe-inspiring thought to end on.
Right.
And it leaves us with a lot to ponder.
It does. We've explored this concept of tithing through personal stories like Brother Para and Martha Williams, delved into that theological foundation with Malachi 3.01. We even uncovered some fascinating historical and cultural parallels.
Yeah, we've seen how tithing functions within the church today, supporting missionary work, temple building, that global community of believers.
And we even touched on some intriguing connections to secular ideas
Yeah.
about giving and abundance mentality. But as
Wait,
always,
it doesn't.
we want to leave you with one final thought to ponder,
Okay.
something to spark further exploration.
I love this part.
So the question is this.
Okay.
If we view tithing as a principle rather than simply a practice,
Okay.
how might that change our perspective?
Ooh.
Could there be applications of this principle, even outside of a religious context,
Okay.
that could enrich our lives?
Yeah.
Could embracing the spirit of tithing, of dedicating a portion of our resources, time, or talents to something greater than ourselves, lead to unexpected blessings and a deeper understanding of our place in the world?
Wow.
That's something to chew on as you continue your own deep dive.
I love that. So good. Thanks for taking this deep dive with me.
Always a pleasure.